So our son James died aged 16 months in May 2022. He had chickenpox in April 2022 and was typically how a young child is with chickenpox, a bit grumbly, bit of a temperature and spots. Had it for a few days, and when the spots started scabbing over, went to nursery again as usual. And then 3 weeks later, he became unwell. This was in May 2022, and we weren't really sure what was wrong with him. He was irritable, wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep, made a lot of groaning noises, and just wasn't himself. Over a period of a couple of days, he didn't really eat much, and nothing in life made him happy. He was very sad. He regressed to being like a newborn baby. He stayed where you put him. In his eyes and his face, he looked so sad. He wasn't sleeping. He made the groaning noise repeatedly. And after a couple of days of Calpol and care by us at home, we then saw a rash on him. We knew there was scarlet fever at the nursery and preschool, so we got a GP appointment because at this point we knew it was over and above our self-care at home. The GP wasn't too sure what was wrong with James, but knew it wasn't scarlet fever, but really wasn't happy with the groaning noise that he was making, and the fact that he'd had chickenpox 3 weeks earlier. So sent Daniel with him to Sheffield Children's Hospital. He was seen there, and the triage nurse thought it was chickenpox, so put him in a room, and then the doctor that Daniel saw with James agreed it was chickenpox and gave a prescription for chamomile lotion. That was then changed to antihistamine drops because they didn't have any chamomile lotion, and then they returned home. I came home from work to take over care, so Daniel could do some work, and I just saw how much he'd regressed just in the few hours I'd been at work. We'd given him the antihistamine drops and a bit of yogurt, and he brought that back up. So we rang 111 for further advice. They weren't happy with the groaning noise he was making either. And they sent us back to Sheffield Children's Hospital within the hour, but really as soon as possible. We went back and it was the same triage nurse. She said, "It's chickenpox, isn't it?" And I said, "I don't know, is it? Because he's had that 3 weeks ago. He's really not very well." And then we saw a doctor and he said it was also chickenpox. Everything we said about how James was presenting to how he is normally, he is such a cheeky little boy and would climb everywhere, was very independent. We lost all of that. He lost all of his personality. He lost his love for life, and he couldn't do anything himself. Everything needed doing for James. Everything was rebuffed and everything was shot down by the doctor. We pointed out the big lesion on his wrist that he'd had from chickenpox 3 weeks earlier, and everything was either explained or we received the comment, "I can't comment on that." He was also diagnosed with a sore throat at this point, so we were given another prescription for sore throat spray and advised that to give him calprufin as well as Calpol. We questioned that because early advice for chickenpox is not to give calprufin, but we were told under the direction of a doctor that was okay. So we left hospital, and then from the Thursday onwards, he was on Calpol, calprufin, antihistamine drops, and then sore throat spray, and we also did source some chamomile lotion as well. We were over reassured by the hospital, and we took him home, and the next day he continued to be sad, and he died at our house that night.
Yeah, so like the things we were like concerned about obviously was this when the spots came back and we didn't know what that was. And he was having like drier nappies, but he was drinking a lot less, so you could sort of explain it for that. Um, when I did become concerned about like possible dehydration was the day after he'd been in hospital, and like when he died a few hours later, because that day he had more to drink that day than the other days, so his nappies should have been wetter. And it was probably about 5 o'clock on the Friday, the day that he died, that I noticed that his nappies weren't very wet at all, and that concerned me. But I think because we'd been so reassured by the doctors that it was just chicken pox, I said, well, we'll take him to the hospital tomorrow if he's still have dry nappies in the morning. And then obviously he died during the night. So, if we'd have been told about the seriousness of dehydration, then we would have taken him to hospital then. Even by then it may have been too late, but you know, afterwards one of the doctors we spoke to said, he might have even been saved at that late stage. Like for myself, I wish I'd been more assertive and said, asked for a second opinion at the time. I didn't realise how junior the doctor was that I saw, because I did the first hospital visit. I didn't realise how junior he was, and I probably would have asked for someone a bit higher if I'd have known that. But obviously in hindsight, I knew he wasn't well, and something just didn't feel right, and I wish I'd just listened to that instinct and asked and said, being more stubborn and said, I'm not leaving until somebody takes a second look at him, and just be more assertive about the fact that it wasn't chicken pox. I think I knew it wasn't, or at least that I was sure it wasn't. I was probably just a bit too reassured, because most of the time you go to the doctors then and they make you better, don't they? But I think I was just too trusting, that the doctor would make him better, and they knew what was best for James. So if I could give any advice, it would be to ask for that second opinion if you're not happy, and trust your own instincts, especially as a parent or if you're caring for somebody else.
It's hard because James had never been in hospital, and that day we got medical advice 4 times within 6 hours, which is massive. And that didn't give the hospital any alarm bells. And during my visit with him in the afternoon, I did refer to the fact I'd been there in the morning, and the 111 call, and the GP's appointment as well. And still that didn't really kind of cause any alarm bells or trigger anything at the hospital, which I think is worrying. Do you know, like, that is unusual behaviour. We are not a family who ask for medical help 4 times in 6 hours. So we were really, really worried, and we said that. And I did challenge what the doctors were saying, but ultimately it was their decision. It was their decision to prescribe sore throat spray. It's really hard because after James died, I googled, like, literally on the trip back from the hospital when we left him there, I googled chickenpox and sore throat, and it came up straight away, group A strep, and that was me on Google. And I know a lot of people are advised, don't Google things, but actually maybe do Google things, and maybe do get another opinion in whatever form that is, whether that might be another doctor in a hospital, or asking friends, or using the internet to kind of empower yourself and to find out more things. Because if I had Googled that at any point on the Thursday, it would have come up group A strep, and then it obviously does suggest antibiotics. So I think my advice would be just to you are the expert in your child, and be strong and be firm and be very clear in how your child presents and how different that is to normal. And even though we did it, I would still want other people to do that and just be very confident, and challenge doctors, because they should know best. But with James, they didn't, and they failed him.
One other thing I would advise parents of is, or anyone attending hospital really, to make sure they get written safety netting advice when they leave. Be that sort of electronic copy or a hard copy, just to just so that they know the signs and the signals of things to look out for relating to what their hospital visit. Because we didn't get any safety net and advice. We should have been given something about what to look out for, and even sort of safety net and advice with regards to chicken pox might have helped. Just giving us a bit more information.
I want it implemented like now, and I want it everywhere, not just in England, but in Ireland, Scotland, and Wales too. It's so important, and I think just having that kind of backup of the rule, of knowing this is your right to a second opinion, will really empower a lot of people. We are very confident and competent parents, but there's so many barriers that people may face when they're trying to convey how their family member is and how they are normally, that I think knowing that there will give people confidence to seek further advice. And that can only be a good thing, because if it verifies how people are, then that's fine, because that affirms it. But if it leads to other diagnoses, or other issues, then hopefully it will help people get better and ultimately save lives too. We contacted Martha's mum literally a week before James's inquest, and it was, I want to say good, but I don't think good's ever the right word. It was very useful to connect with her, to find out her experiences of inquest and what happened with Martha firsthand. We'd read about it the year before in The Guardian, but just to kind of have that personal communication. And that was before Martha's rule was kind of at the forefront of the press and hopefully being rolled out. So she's definitely got the drive from what happened to Martha to make things better. It was a very difficult year, and difficult doesn't seem to be the strong enough word, but there had to be a serious investigation by Sheffield Children's Hospital before we could have the inquest. So the investigation needed to take place and needed to be concluded. It was a very long process. It was drawn out. There were extensions. And that was really difficult because that delayed the inquest. And although I never wanted the inquest to happen, I wanted it to happen at the same time. And it was really conflicting emotions, because I wanted as much justice for James as could be done. But equally, it's such a daunting experience. And just the thought of it made me feel physically quite sick. It's really hard to relive James's last few days and his death and the months afterwards, but we needed answers. So it was a really long time. The inquests should generally be within 6 months of a person dying, but James's was 49 weeks after, so it was nearly a year. It was nearly double what it should have been. And that just felt really cruel, because I didn't really want the inquest anytime near the anniversary of the death, and it was. So it's a very difficult time of year, April and May, for us. The process of the inquest, we were so supported by the coroner, the coroner's assistant. It was a really welcoming and careful, supportive environment, and it was made as comfortable as possible for family and friends. But equally, it is a court and it is very official. And that was the first time we re-encountered the medical professionals that encountered James on his attendances at the hospital. And even that, being in the same room and seeing them again, it's really hard. There's so many emotions, there's so much you want to say, but you need to follow the court processes. There was a jury who had to make the conclusions of what happened to James, but the inquest was scheduled for a full week, because there were so many different witnesses and so many different pieces of information that needed to be shared. The jury was sent out for deliberations, and they had 27 statements to comment yes or no on, and all of them were against the hospital, unanimously, and that they concluded that it was the failures of the hospital, and the neglect of the hospital that led to his death. That was massive, and I think we're still digesting that conclusion now. I think deep down throughout the entire year, we knew that they'd messed up. We knew that they'd failed James. But to hear other people who are completely unbiased and completely independent of either us or the hospital find that as fact is humongous, and scary, really scary, that it's true that they did lead to his death. It was really hard to be there that week. It was emotionally draining, but also physically. I think a lot of people focus on the emotions of it, but I was absolutely shattered. There's a lot of sitting around waiting, which Daniel found difficult. And there's a lot of going over the exact same things, but from different people's points of view. So we had to give our witness statements, but then we had to hear different versions of that from the medical professionals. And it's not like a court that you watch on EastEnders where people can shout out objection, and it is a very kind and calm court, which is really hard to sit through when people are maybe not saying the full truth. We contacted the UK Sepsis Trust 3 days before the start of the inquest, and I was just really panicking that although our legal team had prepared us for the processes and the legalities of the inquest, I didn't know anything about inquests from kind of a personal point of view. And I was so grateful for speaking with Katie, one of the sepsis nurses, because she gave us such practical support for the inquest. Her first piece of advice to us was about fruit pastels, and I would not naturally have taken sweets to court, because that's kind of what you do at the theatre or the cinema, where it's entertainment, and I wouldn't want to do that to disrespect James, but I wouldn't want anyone else in the court to think that I was there for a fun day out. But she explained to me that all of the different physical things that happen to your body, you need to keep going. So the sugar will really help give you an energy boost. They're quite refreshing. You'll be there a long time, and you'll be like without meals for a long time, so you'll need the sugar. But also they're a good sweet to chomp down on if you hear something that isn't necessarily true, because you can't shout out. And that was just such a huge piece of advice for us. And I'll never forget that. But also about taking different layers with you. So having cardigans or jumpers, because sometimes the courtrooms can be really quite hot and stuffy because there's lots of people there. But sometimes the air conditioning is on too much. But also about psychologically, a lot of the discussion is about James dying, James's dead body, us discovering James's body, the CPR on James's body. And she was talking to us about the shock that our bodies might re-go into when either we were discussing that or when other people were discussing that. So to have a scarf or a cardigan to put on to kind of like physically warm your body up, it was just such invaluable advice. And really helped. Even things like taking some lip balm, because sometimes it can be such a drying atmosphere, to kind of physically keep you going throughout the week. And I'll always be so grateful to Katie for that. So me and Daniel used a lot of those examples of advice, but we also shared it with our friends and family who could be in the courtroom with us, because they were feeling exactly the same emotions that we were. So it was good that we'd got practical advice to keep us going through the week.
Look out for legal advice that you can get for free, depending on the circumstances. And just if anybody offers support, like family or friends, to come along, then take it, because our family and friends are really supportive and helpful around that time, and it really just helps us out having that support there. Especially there's a lot of time where you're sort of just in the family rooms, and you're not actually in the courtroom, so it's just nice to have that distraction there and have family around to support you.
The advice I'd give to anyone else, if for whatever reason they can't have legal advice, is to give the coroner all the questions you have. They really do want to find facts, and as long as the questions are reasonable and appropriate about fact finding for the loved one, the coroner will make sure those questions are asked and hopefully answered. So although the coroner is impartial, they want to make it as nice, even though nice isn't the greatest word, an experience for the family. They're there to kind of get you through it, even though they are completely independent. I don't think they'd ever want families to be walking out of an inquest with a lot of unanswered questions that they hadn't had the opportunity to ask. For me, like, that's the first time I cried in court that week. It was such a relief that what we knew was the truth was found by independent people. But we asked, 18 months on, I'm still coming to terms with that and accepting that and processing that. It was such a massive weight on our shoulders that we needed the correct conclusion for James, so that there was, one, some justice for James, and two, people can learn from it. Because if the conclusion hadn't been that, then I don't think the learning would have been as impactful in whatever way the conclusion could have gone, because it was so clear all of the failings that the hospital made and their neglect. There have had to have been significant changes, and that gives us some peace, because that shows us that what happened was wrong, and people are hopefully trying to prevent repeated failings.
Yeah, I think it's just a relief really that other people saw it the same way as we did, and especially with it being a jury, it was just people, sort of regular people without that sort of legal knowledge as well. They saw it the way that we did, and it sort of helped just reinforce that there wasn't really anything more that we could have done as a couple. It was sort of all down on the hospital really that she should have been saved. I think initially it's just complete shock, and it's hard to process and get your head around what's actually happened, and it just takes so long like that, in that sort of state where and you've got so many like unanswered questions, and we really didn't know like why he died, what had actually killed him, because shouldn't die from just chickenpox. So there was that, and then just the it's just so hard to actually get used to life without a 16-month-old, because you go from it being so busy, especially James, who was like just the busiest little boy and just getting into everything that he could. And you're sort of constantly on your toes, and then you've just got this massive like void in your life that you've got to try and fill, um, and try and come to terms with. So initially that's the biggest thing, I think. Just obviously you've got the sadness to cope with, but just that massive adjustment to your life, and trying to get your head around things.
We literally went into autopilot. It didn't feel real that day, but because of James's groaning noise and because he wasn't sleeping that week, we hadn't really slept properly since the Monday night, and he died on the Friday night. So we'd had a full week of completely uninterrupted sleep. And then because he died Friday night, early hours of Saturday morning, we never went to bed really that night. We had a couple of hours sleep before Daniel found him. So all of the Saturday we were in like conversations with the police and the hospital, and we had to just immediately go through all of these horrendous processes, which I needed, but are so hard anyway. And then you've lost your son, and then you haven't slept for 4 days. It felt so surreal. It was like an out of body experience. It felt like it wasn't me. Like I was like almost watching a film of me go through it. It's really hard to describe, but I was so scared about going to bed on the Saturday night because I really didn't want to wake up on the Sunday and forget that James had died, because I didn't want to have to almost relearn that James had died. But our bodies were just so exhausted because of the trauma, but also the lack of sleep for 4 days, that I did sleep okay. And then I felt guilty the next day that I had slept okay, because I shouldn't be able to sleep okay because my baby's just died. But every day since then, I've never not known he was dead. Because then I felt a bit of relief on the Sunday that at least I knew he was dead, and I didn't have to go through that initial trauma again of knowing that he died. But then every day for probably the next few months, I was really worried about the next day, not thinking that I might forget that he died. But touch wood, I never have. And I don't know if, because it has been 18 months now, if I never will and I'll always know, or if someday that will hit me. I'm not sure. It was really hard because we didn't know why James had died for 3.5 months. So in the obviously the days that followed James dying, we then had to plan a funeral. Daniel and I are very lucky that our parents are still with us. We've never had to plan a funeral before. We didn't really know where to begin, what to do first. But we kind of threw ourselves into organising because that was something we could do. We needed to keep busy. It wouldn't have been very healthy for us to sit around our front room looking at all of his toys and photos. We needed to be busy. We also had to support our 4.5-year-old son at the time because he needed all the love in the world and more at that point. How can you explain it properly to someone so young that their baby brother was there one day and not the next? James and his brother were a lot of fun. There were a lot of energy. And I don't think there's a right way to have a funeral for a 16-month-old. So we did it the right way for us and our other son. So we had a funeral, and then afterwards, rather than a traditional wake, we had a party at a farm, and we invited all of our other son's friends and families and colleagues, and it was the coming together for everyone that loved James. But there was lots of activities for all of the 4 and 5-year-olds and the younger children too. There was pet handling and tractor tours and a disco and food and loads of photos and loads of memories. James's favourite song was the conga, so we did the conga. But that was about a month after James died. We had the funeral, but it was 3.5 months later we got the official results of the postmortem, because they needed to grow blood cultures to find out the exact cause of death. And that came in the August, saying that he had group A strep, which had led to sepsis, and it conclusively said that chickenpox was not present. I just knew that sepsis could kill, and I knew that there was a campaign for sepsis and there was information on the sides of ambulances, but I wouldn't have been able to say what the physical signs of sepsis were.
I didn't know much about the specific signs of sepsis, just the sort of, you look out for the warning signs of mainly with your children. So the sort of lethargy and high temperature, things like that I was just generally aware of the signs of when to seek help for things like that, but I didn't know all the signs of sepsis or anything like that. If I had done, if we'd have learnt them in the hospital, it would have been really useful. And I didn't know there was a link between sort of sepsis and chickenpox, and that you could develop group A strep from chickenpox, and that could lead to sepsis. So.
For me, it would be to learn the signs of sepsis, but always ask if your child has any of those signs of sepsis and you're in some kind of hospital or doctor setting, ask, could this be sepsis? And we would just want to raise lots of awareness about sepsis, because some good has to come out of this, because otherwise James has died and other people might die too. For me, it's just knowing people are there and people check in on me without asking me how I am, because I find the question, how are you, really difficult to answer because there just aren't the words. Whereas I feel the question, how are you doing today, or how is today going, much easier to answer. Even though they're very similar, I feel like I can talk about practical things like, oh, I was all right earlier and then I got stuck in traffic, and those, yeah, I can kind of tell a story rather than try and awkwardly think of some emotion, because I can't really say, yeah, I'm okay, thanks, how are you? Because I'm not okay. And I don't think I'll ever be okay, but nor should I, because James has died. Just being there for people is really important. the practical help of providing food in the immediate aftermath of James dying was so helpful and so appreciative. But what keeps me going and keeps me connected to friends and family is by people talking about James to me. I want to talk about him. I don't want his memory to go. I don't want people to feel awkward. I like sharing pictures, I like sharing memories, and I love people continuing those conversations with me. We had 16 wonderful months with James, but we're not going to have any further milestones after his 16 months. So when we don't have the opportunity to share his first day at school photo or what his GCSE results are. So we almost need our team around us to kind of appreciate that, and to embrace me sharing the same picture of James every Children in Need Day because he looked really cute in his pudsey pyjamas. So that for me is really important.
And just like, don't be scared to talk to someone about their child or their loved one that's passed away. Try and be guided by them if you can, and I'm sure they might want to talk about them and share their memories of the person they've lost, and it does help. Just keep in touch with people as well. You don't have to ask how are you or anything like that, but just find something that you've got in common, and just share a message or something like that with them. Just keep in touch. Just let them know that you're there. Acknowledge the loss maybe, but don't overreact if you hear someone who says that they've lost a child or lost a loved one. Just say that you're sorry or something, but don't overreact to it. And you don't want to, as a sort of bereaved person, or if someone who's grieving, I don't think you want to be in that awkward position. So yeah, just sort of acknowledge it, but don't overreact, I think, maybe.
For me, I just loved his character. He was so strong, determined, and independent. And even though he was 16 months, he was pretty much in charge of our house. He'd got so many toys in the house, but what he loved doing was swiping coasters off our side tables. And he did that when he turned his back on all of his toys. He loved making mess. So we'd have baskets and boxes of toys in the front room. And he would love nothing more than emptying the baskets and then putting the basket on top of his head. He was so cheeky, and he absolutely adored climbing. He'd got a ride on pirate ship, and the idea was you would sit on it and like push yourself around the room. But James had other ideas, so he would walk with it, dragging it next to him, and then he would then stand on it and climb on it. And then reach all of the items that we've put out of reach for James, and then he would turn around and give you his cheekiest smile. And his smile just got him out of all kinds of trouble, really, because it was so beautiful.
I don't think people believe us when they say about how much character he actually had, because he's only 16 months, but he was just like he's a little bundle of energy, always doing something, always like really busy, babbling and trying to talk to people. He loved his big brother, loved spending time with him, but he wouldn't sort of bow down to him and be the you know he'd sort of he'd follow him around, but he wasn't bossed around by his big brother at all. He'd try and show him who was boss. And yeah, it was impossible to be mad with James. Even when he'd knock something on the floor, knock drinks over, refuse to eat his tea, or eat some of his tea, throw it on the floor, and he'd just give you the biggest smile, and then you just couldn't be angry with him because he just had the most amazing smile. So like cheeky and lovable.
So we chose 16 things because James was 16 months. I'm personally much better if I'm busy. So giving us things to work towards, but also to help our friends, family, and the whole community that was devastated by James's death. People want to help, but normally there's not much things people can do, and then people feel helpless. So by doing things, it's a joint venture. People can get involved, people can support us, people can help us come up with ideas of things to do. And 16 not only was the age that James was, it's a nice amount of things. It wasn't a couple and then would run out and then there'd be a definite end. It will take us a while, and we're in no rush to complete them, because hopefully me and Daniel will have long and happy lives, and so will his older brother. And we want to include his brother in making decisions about the things we can do in James's memory. We want to give people places that they can visit and think of James, and it also helps us be connected to those people and with James's memory. So 2 of the 16 things that we've achieved were, we've got a bench in a local park with an inscription, and it says, "Cheeky and stubborn with a wonderful smile." And I think that just sums up James. And people go to that bench. It's got beautiful views. It's also in our nearest park. It's a park where James spent a lot of his time in the playground or being pushed around in his pushchair. And it gives people a bit of peace, a bit of time for reflection. But people also send us selfies that were sat there, and then we're connected, and then it shows us that they're remembering James. The bench was crowdfunded by all of his friends and family as well, so people could help by paying a little bit of money towards James's bench. And equally, we've got a wooden fish plaque in Hull at the Deep, and James loved visiting the Deep. Not He was more bothered about the bubbles, I think, than the fish, but it was a great sensory experience for him. Lots to see and do, lots to point at, lots of tanks that he shouldn't have been banging on that we had to take his hands off. But again, we've got a lot of friends with children who take their families to the Deep, and they all send us selfies with James's fish. Last year, I really appreciated people mentioning James in Christmas cards. And I know that the sending and receiving of Christmas cards is dying out slightly. But that was the first time we were getting cards without James's name on. And it was really hard to open cards with just 3 of our names on. So for people who did write our 3 names and put something like, "Remembering James this Christmas, as always," was really quite beautiful. And it just made us feel like people remember, people love James, and people were sending us like love in that card. When we sign cards now, we put like a star instead of James's name, because it feels really disrespectful not to put his name. But then it's the balance of, we can't pretend that he's still here either. So for us to sign our 3 names and then put a star is our kind of way of acknowledging his existence. I've had counselling through cruise and through work, and I've had a few calls with Katie one-to-one, and then I've been attending some of the group sessions. So I attend some of the bereavement ones. So I attended one last night, but then Katie's also put us together in a separate section of like bereaved parents, so parents that have lost their child, and we had one support group for that as well. And then following that, there's like a WhatsApp group where we can all check in with each other and give each other support, because we're all on completely different stages of this journey. And within that group, there are a few people whose children died at an older age and a few years ago, and there's people's children who have died even more recently than James is, and they're going through the investigation and inquest process now. And for me, that's quite beneficial to hear how people are who are kind of ahead of me in this journey and how their lives are now. It helps to give me hope. And it also helps me knowing that if I share anything that happened with James to the people that are almost a bit behind us in this journey, it might help them with their experiences too. So although I feel like I'm helping them, that in turn helps me because I feel like the journey has some use to other people too.
So I've had some like maybe informal counselling just to talk things through, and I've also used things like the advice on social media from the Sepsis Trust or from like bereavement groups on social media, just so I can access it as and when I need it, I suppose. And I just try and keep busy, and I sort of keep a daily log of things like how I'm feeling. And some days it's very boring. It can be what I've had for tea or what the football scores are or something like that. And other days it can stretch to a few pages where you might not have had a good day or something. So you just try and write your feelings down, and it just helps me to work out how I'm feeling and just to get it out there just to write it down on paper.
I always think it's very interesting how different me and Daniel are. And I think it represents a lot of couples, but a lot of different people anyway, because definitely the things that help Daniel, journaling and sport, whereas the things that help me are normally wine and cake. And it just shows how differently people cope with things. I'm a teacher at a special needs school. So I teach children that are between 11 and 19 with autism and or communication difficulties. The staff team have been absolutely amazing. Again, it was another community that were absolutely devastated by James's death. And I was so grateful that I was allowed to be released to attend like the meetings and the inquests from work, and also a bit of time to help some of the organisations following James's death do better in their responses to child death.
Yeah, so I'm a project support coordinator. I work at Sheffield Hallam University, and yeah, so my employer's been very supportive. My line manager and the sort of senior team in our area have been very supportive of days off that I've needed to have or time out. And I work flexibly as well, so sometimes if I'm maybe not feeling up to going into the office, I can work from home and keep busy, but just sort of keep to myself as well, which is quite useful for me. And it luckily sort of work's never been an issue, and if anything, it's helped me to sort of throw myself into work and have that busyness and um, have that support team with colleagues as well has been useful.
So following James's death, there were some organisations who we did give feedback to of how they either handled us as a family or James's belongings. So we have been working with South Yorkshire Police on their responses to child death. So I've been going to different parts of South Yorkshire Police, so the different areas in Sheffield, Doncaster, Rotherham and Barnsley, and giving our perspective of how it felt like with all the questions and all the processes from the police's point of view, but how it felt firsthand as a bereaved mother and who didn't know her child was going to die. It was an unexpected death, and the way that we were made to feel and the communication issues. It was never an official complaint to the police. It was, if this happens again, please do a little bit better, and please maybe, yes, you need to be professionally curious as to whether a crime had been taken place, but possibly be a bit more sensitive in your language and your handling of things. And I have been so impressed with how on board everyone has been from South Yorkshire Police. Everyone's been so receptive, and it's really made officers think about if they ever have to attend a horrendous situation like that, of it gave them an insight of how it was from the other side, and if it was them, how they would want to feel. So I feel like that's a positive that needs to be shared with Yorkshire Ambulance Service. Some of James's belongings were destroyed, so we're currently working with them on issues around patient belongings and helping other people's belongings be safer in the future. And there'll be more to shared on that in the future. And we are working with Sheffield Children's Hospital to hopefully improve their sepsis awareness as a hospital, but also thinking about James's story in particular. So we are sharing James's story with lots of photos, beautiful photos of James, but also photos of James really quite poorly in their hospital and the big lesion on his wrist, because we want things open, honest, transparent, and we want them to know that they've got our full blessing to use James's story to hopefully prevent any similar deaths in the future.